Back in San Isidro, the rain had stopped, leaving the night alive with the chirping of crickets. Mang Pedro carried the unconscious Aswang off his boat, laying it gently on the ground. Villagers who witnessed the storm and the creature's arrival cowered in their homes, whispering prayers under their breaths. Mang Pedro, though, needed help. Ignoring the frightened murmurs, he went from hut to hut, waking the sleeping village. "It's not a monster," he told them urgently, showing the creature's wounds, "but a dying animal. We need to help." Still, fear ran deep in San Isidro, and many refused, citing the tales of Aswang's preying on men. Undeterred, Mang Pedro gathered a small group of women known for their knowledge of herbs and remedies. Together, they carried the Aswang to the village healer's hut, its scales still wet and glistening in the dim lamplight. The women set about preparing poultices and concoctions, their movements careful, their faces etched with worry. Mang Pedro sat beside the Aswang, watching its chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Hours passed, ticking by like years, until the first hint of dawn touched the sky. The Aswang stirred, opening its eyes slowly. They were pools of gold, flecked with green, intelligent and wary. Mang Pedro held his breath, bracing for a snarl or a lash of its powerful tail, anything except what came next. A raspy voice, surprisingly human, rasped out, "Where am I?" The Aswang looked around the hut, its gaze settling on him. "Who are you?" it asked again, its voice stronger now, laced with suspicion. Mang Pedro hesitated, torn between fear and the innate kindness that had brought him here. Seeing the doubt in his eyes, the Aswang tensed, its tail lashing out, striking a lamp and sending shards of glass flying. Quickly, Mang Pedro stepped forward, holding up his hands in surrender. "I won't hurt you," he said softly, "but you must let me help you." And so began the strangest alliance in the sleepy barrio of San Isidro. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the world in golden light, the Aswang, who introduced himself as Alan, told his tale. He spoke of a world beneath the waves, of merfolk caught between the human and the wild, shaped by the same moon and stars. But as beautiful as their underwater kingdom was, Alan longed for the surface, for the feel of wind on his scales and the taste of fresh rain. One day, braving the journey to the human world, he'd been caught in the storm, injured by a fisher's net, and left to die. Mang Pedro listened intently, his initial fear giving way to understanding. These weren't monsters, he realized, but lonely, misunderstood creatures driven by curiosity and longing just like him. By nightfall, Alan was stronger, his wounds dressed and bandaged thanks to the village healer's expertise, yet he remained wary, sensing the villagers' unease and heeding the whispers carried by the wind. That night, as the full moon bathed the world in silver light, Alan slipped away, melting back into the shadows and the waves. Before disappearing, he turned to Mang Pedro, his golden eyes shining with gratitude. "You have shown me kindness when I least expected it," he said, his voice echoing the lapping of waves against the shore, "and for that I will repay you." With that, he vanished, leaving behind the scent of salt and the memory of moonlight on water. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen in San Isidro. Fishermen returned with tales of abundant catches, their nets overflowing with the bounty of the sea. The once struggling barrio bustled with activity, the air filled with laughter and the smell of freshly caught seafood. Mang Pedro, watching the transformation of his village, smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest adventures lead to the simplest pleasures, like the taste of fish freshly caught and shared with those you love. The salty wind whipped at Mang Pedro's face, the rocking of the waves a constant lullaby as he steered his banca through the darkening waters. The sky, once a brilliant blue, was now bruised with purple storm clouds, mirroring the turmoil in his heart. It had been 3 days since he'd found her, 3 days since his world had turned upside down. Her name, he learned, was Dana. Dana of the sea, she told him, her voice like the tinkling of seashells. Dana, who was both human and the mythical Aswang, shapeshifter of the deep. Shapeshifter. The word echoed in Mang Pedro's mind as he kneaded the dough for his pandezel, the soft, yielding dough strangely comforting in its familiarity. 3 days since he'd defied the old tales and kept her. 3 days since his neighbors' warnings had turned to fearful whispers. He remembered the night he found her, the nets of his banca heavy with what felt like a mountain's weight. At first he thought it was just seaweed, a prank by the mischievous duende of the sea. But then he saw her, glistening in the moonlight, part human, part marine beast. Her eyes, luminous pools in the darkness, held a haunting beauty that belied the danger she represented. Mang Pedro, despite his fear, couldn't bring himself to cast her back into the churning waves. And now here she was, sitting by his tiny kitchen table, sipping the tuba he brought her laughter echoing his own apprehension. Dana, with her scales the color of burnished copper and fins that twitched even in the stillness of his hut. Dana, who spoke of coral castles and ships that sailed the ocean floor. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Mang Pedro could hear the gossiping tongues of the barrio through the walls of his nipa hut. They knew she was here. They knew he had defied the ancient tales that warned of Aswangs, creatures that preyed on humans, stealing their souls or using their bodies as vessels. But Mang Pedro couldn't bring himself to fear her, not when her eyes, though otherworldly, held such sadness. Not when her touch, despite the scales, was as gentle as the summer rain. He looked away as she rose. Her movements fluid, graceful, almost otherworldly. Her gaze followed his, her expression unreadable. Mang Pedro averted his eyes, suddenly self-conscious in the worn t-shirt and faded jeans he'd been working in. What did she think of him? This creature of the deep, this Aswang that was both captivating and terrifying. Why do you keep me here? Her voice, like the tinkling of seashells, broke through his thoughts. You could leave, you know. Her eyes, pools of molten gold, searched his. Why don't you leave? He asked, his voice rough with disuse. Because, she said softly, I am not like the stories they tell you. He knew that. He'd seen the kindness in her eyes, the gentleness in her touch, yet fear still lingered in his gut, a knot of dread that tightened whenever he heard the whispers in the barrio. Fear for her, fear for himself, fear of the unknown. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. You fear me, Mang Pedro? His breath hitched. How did she know what he was thinking? He began, then stopped. What was he hiding from her? From himself. I'm not like you, Dana, he said finally. But that does not make you less of a person. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers. Her fingers were cool, smooth like polished stones. And in that moment he knew he wasn't just drawn to her otherworldly beauty or the mystery that clung to her like the scent of the sea. He was drawn to her because, in her eyes and her touch, he saw a kindred spirit. Someone who, like him, was caught between two worlds. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks of Mang Pedro's hut, casting faint stripes across the dalajang on the mat. Her name was Lyra, she murmured, her voice soft but carrying a strange melodic weight, like the hum of the sea. She stirred slowly, her eyes still glowing faintly meeting his, with gratitude laced with wariness. Mang Pedro sat rigid, his bolo knife within reach, its blade catching the dim glow of the oil lamp. He'd tended her wound through the night, using herbs from the gubat, but trust was a fragile thing. Lyra spoke of a curse, cast by a mancuculum in a distant provincia, that bound her to an Aswang's life, forcing her to feed on the living. Yet, she claimed to hunt only the wicked thieves who preyed on the poor. Abusers hiding in the barrio's shadows, not innocents, like the tales warned. Mang Pedro listened, his heart torn between disbelief and the pull of her sincerity. The village outside stirred to life, the curanderos clatter, and the sorbetero's bell drifted through the air. But whispers Grunabers noticed his absence, muttering about strange lights in his hut. Lyra's presence was a secret he couldn't keep long. As days passed, she grew stronger, her wound closing under his care. They talked late into the nights, sharing stories of loss, his Tate's worsening fever, her endless wandering under the curse's weight. The fisherman's hut, once a place of solitude, became a fragile sanctuary. Yet danger loomed. One evening, a shadow moved in the neogan, too tall, too swift to be human. Lyra tensed, whispering of a tikbalong, a horse-headed creature envious of her power, stalking the gubat. Mang Pedro gripped his bolo tighter, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the hut's walls. The village's rhythm continued, the tinderong bartered fish. Children chased each other through the sitio, but an unease settled over him. Lyra's stories of her past, of battles with other Aswangs, hinted at enemies drawn to her weakened state, wondered if saving her had invited doom to San Isidro. The thought of losing her, of returning her to the darkness she'd come from, made his gut twist. The old Mang Larry, his neighbor, had warned him of creatures like hers. Their hunger insatiable, their touch a drain on the soul. But looking at Lyra, at the way she flinched at the snap of a twig as if wincing for him, he knew those stories couldn't contain her all. As the moon rose, casting silver over the Provincia, Mang Pedro felt the weight of a choice: protect this stranger who defied the horrors of legend, or heed the village's fears and cast her out, before the shadows in the Gubat struck. His wrinkled hands, usually nimble with a fishing net or a bamboo pole, trembled. The task seemed monumental, taking on whatever lurked outside with nothing but a fisherman's knife. But as Lyra stirred beside him, her breath soft and even, he knew he couldn't abandon her. The thought of the Tikbalong reaching her, of the pain it might inflict, fueled his resolve. Mang Pedro stepped out of the hut, his silhouette starked against the rising sun. In the distance, the mountains loomed, hiding the Gubat where shadows danced and the Tikbalong stalked. His hut, a fragile island of light and encroaching darkness. Whatever came, he'd be ready. The sky bled hues of orange and purple as Mang Pedro set about reinforcing his hut, driven by a primal urge to protect the girl who'd captured in Aswang's heart. Moonlight spilled over the Niogan, casting long shadows around Mang Pedro's hut as he sat with Lyra. The air was thick with the scent of salt and herbs. Their evenings had settled into a quiet rhythm. Words flowed easily between them under the stars. He told her about his dream to build a sturdier banca, one that could carry him and his ailing tate to better markets beyond the Provincia. She shared fragments of her cursed life, tales of Aswangs, who once coexisted with humans before greed twisted their kind. Her touch, cool as sea mist, brushed his hand as she taught him hidden currents where fish thrived. Her knowledge born of centuries in the ocean's depths. In return, he showed her the simple joys of the barrio. Sharing halo from the sorbetero's cart, its sweetness a fleeting escape from their fears. What began as cautious trust deepened. A tender spark ignited between them. But Mang Pedro wrestled with its impossibility. She was no ordinary Delagan. Her glowing eyes betrayed her nature. Yet her laughter, soft and unguarded, felt human enough to stir his heart. The village buzzed unaware. The Carindera was alive with chatter, but danger crept closer. One night, a faint hum filled the air. Mang Pedro stiffened, his head snapping up. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice tight with alarm as beetles suddenly swarmed the hut, their wings whispering curses.
Ow.
Lyra's face paled. She recognized the work of a Mamba Barang from a rival sitio, a sorcerer using insects to track her weakened state. "They want me to be fully turned," she whispered back, her voice trembling. Fear coiled in Mang Pedro's gut, but he forced himself to stay calm. He grabbed the fire poker, its end red hot from the dying embers. "Yanga," he hissed, waving it like a makeshift torch. The pests recoiled, their tiny forms writhing in the air. Charred bodies littered the floor, their stench mingling with the smoke. When the coast was clear, Lyra sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean to bring this curse upon you," she murmured, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Mang Pedro knelt beside her, his calloused fingers gently brushing her hair. His own fear and anger ebbed away, replaced by a fierce determination. This wasn't her curse, he realized. It was theirs, the villagers, for failing to see beyond her kind. And maybe, just maybe, it was his curse too, for letting his fear of losing her eclipse his common sense. Over the next few days, whispers spread through the barrio. The Tinderong spoke of strange omens. The sorbetero swore he saw shadows dancing in the Gubat. Mang Pedro's absences fueled gossip, with some muttering of Mananagus. Aswang hunters, who roamed the Provincia with garlic and salt, he barely noticed. With each passing moment, his resolve hardened. He gathered potent herbs, those that warded off evil spirits and repelled pests. With nimble fingers, he wove them into a net, forming a barrier around his hut. Lyra watched him, her earlier despair giving way to awe. "This won't stop them," she said softly, her eyes filled with worry. He knew she was right, but it was all he could think to do. Their connection, forged in the face of fear and prejudice, grew stronger. Every stolen glance, Every shared story wove a bond between them that neither Mang Pedro nor Lyra had ever known. Yet as the days grew darker, fear gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Tate's coughs rattled in the stillness of the night, a stark reminder of the danger that now enveloped them both. Then there were the children. He remembered their innocent laughter, their games echoing in the Niagan. How would they fare if the Aswangs came? How could he ensure their safety? But more than their safety, what about their love? Was it real, or just a figment of his fear-addled mind? Did she feel it too? The spark that ignited between them? He longed to ask her, to hold her. To tell her that despite the darkness gathering at their doorstep, he would choose her, choose love over fear. But he knew he couldn't, not yet, not until the shadows in the barrio were vanquished. The waning moon cast long, distorted shadows on the ground, mimicking the dread that coiled in Mang Pedro's stomach. He adjusted the net, its tangled mess a reflection of his jumbled thoughts. Outside, a twig snapped. He whirled around, his bolo flashing in the meager light. There in the clearing stood a lone figure, its features obscured by the darkness. The air crackled with tension as the figure stepped closer, revealing itself to be a tikbalang. Its horse-like eyes gleamed with malicious amusement, lips curling into a sneer. "Looking for someone?" the tikbalang taunted, its voice dripping with mockery. "Perhaps you should ask the trees. They seem to know quite a lot about her whereabouts." It gestured towards the silent trees lining the edge of the clearing. "And if you are indeed her lover," the tikbalang continued, its eyes narrowing, "you must be prepared to make a choice between your love for her and the safety of your village." With that ominous warning, the tikbalang vanished into the night, leaving Mang Pedro trembling with rage and fear. The sun dipped low over San Isidro, painting the Niagan in hues of fire as Mang Pedro stood guard outside his hut. Beside him, nestled in a woven banig, slept Lyra, her breathing soft and even. The village hummed with its usual rhythm. Children laughed near the carinderia. The sorbatero's bell jingled faintly in the balmy evening air. But a chill lingered, unnatural for the coastal heat. It was the same eerie feeling that had settled over San Isidro days before, a harbinger of strange happenings. And the arrival of Tate Ramon, the albulado from a neighboring barrio, did little to ease the unease. Tate Ramon, with his weathered face, etched with years of battling spirits, and his eyes as sharp as a hawk, appeared at Mang Pedro's door, unannounced. His gaze was fixed on the hut, his presence radiating an unsettling energy. "You've invited death," he warned, his voice low and gravelly, pointing to the faint glow of Lyra's eyes, which shone through the gap in the wall. Mang Pedro's heart skipped a beat. He knew what the old man meant, but he couldn't bring himself to harm her. "She's one of us, Tate," he said, gesturing to Lyra. "She just needs a chance." Tate Ramon, his face impassive, shook his head. "That wound she carries, it wasn't dealt by chance nor by human hand. It's the mark of an Aswang. She preys on the souls of men." He paused, his eyes boring into Mang Pedro. "And if she isn't stopped, more will die." Mang Pedro's mind reeled. Could this be true? The thought of Lyra as a monster, a creature that fed on human souls, was too horrifying to contemplate. Yet he had seen her kindness, her fierce protectiveness of those she cared about. He had watched her help the sick and comfort the dying. The idea that she could be an Aswang, a predator that haunted the night, seemed utterly incompatible with the warm, generous woman he had come to know. Tate Ramon spoke again, his voice leaving no room for argument. "There is only one way to know for sure," he said, "a ritual under the light of the full moon in the heart of the Niagan. If she is truly a daughter of the darkness, the forest will claim her." His words hung heavy in the air, leaving Mang Pedro with a choice that could determine not only Lyra's fate, but the very soul of San Isidro. Days turned into a restless night. Mang Pedro grappled with doubt and fear. The arrival of Tate Ramon had cast a long shadow over the village. People whispered in hushed tones, exchanging worried glances. The idyllic charm of San Isidro seemed to dim under the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. As the full moon bathed the world in silver, Mang Pedro, Tate, Ramon, and Lyra found themselves amidst the towering coconut trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and salt. The rhythmic rustling of leaves overhead intensified, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Tate Ramon began the ritual, his chant rising and falling like the tide. Each word seemed to pierce the darkness, sending shivers down Mang Pedro's spine. Lyra stood motionless, her eyes closed, her body swaying slightly, as if responding to some unseen rhythm. Then suddenly, her form flickered. For a split second, she was human, her features sharp and beautiful. Then she was something else, a creature of the night, with eyes that glowed an eerie red and fangs that glistened in the moonlight. And then she was human again. The forest stirred. A swarm of insects, buzzing like 1,000 angry voices, descended upon them, sent by the Mamba Brang. The one who had inflicted the wound on Lyra's shoulder. Mang Pedro felt a stinging pain as one of the insects landed on his arm, but his fear was eclipsed by concern for Lyra. She remained still, her face pale. Then in a flash she lunged forward, shielding Tate Ramon, whose eyes widened in surprise from a venomous bite. Her arm, the one that bore the mark, throbbed and bled anew. Mang Pedro reacted instinctively. With a yell, he swung his bolo, scattering the swarm and sending the insects buzzing back into the night. His heart pounded against his ribs, his eyes darting between Tate Ramon and Lyra. The albulario remained silent, his gaze fixed on Lyra. In that moment, Mang Pedro knew that she had risked her own safety to protect him. Her humanity, her capacity for selflessness, shone brighter than any malevolence that might have dwelled within her. As they made their way back to the hut, Tate Ramon finally broke the silence. His voice was softer now, the harsh edges worn away, revealing a sadness that mirrored Mang Pedro's own. "I see now," he said. "You were right to trust her, Mang Pedro. She is not a monster. Not entirely." He paused, his eyes distant. "But there is darkness at her heels. A mancuculum, a sorceress of great power. She walks with a pack of Aswangs, and they are hungry for Lyra, for the magic that flows through her veins. They seek to claim her, to corrupt the essence of San Isidro." Mang Pedro felt a chill crawl up his spine. The idyllic charm of his village, the warmth of the people, the laughter of children at play, all of it seemed perilously poised on the edge of a blade. He looked down at his feet, his heart heavy with the dawning realization of the battles that lay ahead, the sacrifices that would be demanded of them. As they reached the hut, he glanced back at the tree line. The gubat, the whispering darkness of the forest, seemed to watch them, its unseen eyes gleaming with anticipation. He could sense the presence of the tikbalang, the mancuculum's spy, its equine eyes watching, waiting for the moment to strike. And he knew that the peace of San Isidro was hanging by a thread, a single delicate strand that could snap at any moment, unleashing chaos and despair. It was getting dark in San Isidro. Air in the barrio grew heavy, the sea beyond the barrio restless, as if sensing the gathering storm. Mang Pedro's Tate lay frail in their hut, his coughs now laced with feverish murmurs of flight and hunger. Symptoms Lyra recognized with dread Yongo, the creeping transformation into an Aswang. Mang Pedro looked at his father, worry etched on his face. His daughter came back from the healer that afternoon, her forehead still bearing the mark of the tikbalang's curse. "She saved me, Papa," Lyra said softly, "but I may have put your soul at risk." Mang Pedro frowned, his gaze fixed on his father. "How so?" Lyra explained how the blood drawn during her healing, her Aswang blood had mingled with Tote's when he cradled her after the bite. If the Yongo takes root in him, he might turn into an Aswang too. Her voice trembled as she shared the grim truth. Mang Pedro felt a chill crawl up his spine. The thought of his beloved wife, of San Isidro, becoming one of those cursed creatures, sent a wave of nausea through him. He knew the stories, tales whispered around dying fires, of villagers lost to the Aswangs, their souls trapped in a never-ending hunger. Desperation lent speed to their steps as they walked into the gubat, the tangled forest on the edge of the barrio. The air grew cooler, the sunlight filtering through the thick canopy, painting the ground in dappled shades of green. All around them, the trees seemed to press closer, their roots forming a labyrinth beneath their feet. The path was treacherous, the undergrowth thick and thorny. But Mang Pedro pushed on, the thought of losing his wife, his daughter, fueling his determination. Then they heard it, a guttural neigh that echoed through the stillness of the woods. Before them stood the tick bawling, its eyes glinting like polished stones. Its features were a grotesque mockery of a noble steed, its human-like torso adorned with crude tattoos that writhed like living things. "You seek my aid," the tick bawling said, its voice a grating rasp. "Answer my riddle, and I shall grant your request." Mang Pedro, drawing on the fisherman's wit he'd honed over years at sea, answered correctly. The tick bawling, as if surprised, nodded once, twice, then reached out a cloven hoof and dipped it into a vial hanging from its saddle. Murky green liquid swirled within. "Drink this," the tick bowling said, its lips curling in a sneer, "and the Yango will stay at bay." Mang Pedro took the vial, his hands shaking, and drank. A wave of cold fire coursed through him, chasing away the oppressive heat of the forest. As they turned to leave, the tick bowling's mocking laughter echoed behind them. Back in the village, whispers of mananages filled the air. Their garlic and salt ready, the villagers kept a wary eye on each other. That night, the Mancuculum's presence descended upon San Isidro like a shroud. Howling winds tore through the barrio, snapping coconut fronds and sending them crashing to the ground. The Aswang pack circled the shoreline, taking the shapes of shrieking bats. Fear coiled in the pit of Mang Pedro's stomach. He helped his wife into their finest dress, her once vibrant eyes dimmed with worry. Together, they walked to the center of the village where the others had gathered. The Carendaria shuddered early, its owner hastily stashing away his wares. The Tinderong hid his wares under his skirt. The Sorbetero fell silent, his bells silenced. Lyra approached, her eyes glowing with a strange light. "We must prepare," she told the small crowd, her voice surprisingly strong. "My blood has tainted our lands. The Mancuculum will come for us all." She looked at Mang Pedro, her gaze unwavering, "but we can stop her." As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, the Mancuculum made her move. Curses spilled from her lips, carried by swarms of insects that gnawed at the edges of the village. Mang Pedro felt a cold dread creep up his spine, constricting his chest. His gaze fell on the bolo at his side, its familiar heft a small comfort in the face of the unseen menace. He looked at the faces around him, etched with fear and uncertainty, and knew that what lay ahead was not just a fight against the Aswangs, but against the paralyzing grip of fear itself. The forest's edge seemed to writhe, and from its depths emerged the Mancuculum and her followers, their forms shifting, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. In that moment, as the fate of San Isidro hung in the balance, Mang Pedro realized that what they needed was not just courage, but a unity that could bind their fears and transform them into strength. With a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders, his grip tightening on his bolo. The battle for San Isidro, for his family, for his very soul, had begun. The sea roared with fury as Mang Pedro, Lyra, and Tate Ramon pushed their banca into the churning waves. The storm summoned by the Mancuculum, blotting out the stars. The air crackled with dark energy, the horizon swallowed by a tempest that seemed to pulse with the sorceress's wrath. Lyra, her wound barely healed, shifted into her marine form, scales glinting as she dove into the water, her fins slicing through the swell. Mang Pedro gripped his harpoon, his bolo strapped to his side, while Tate Ramon clutched a pouch of blessed salt and the Tick Belong's talisman, its faint glow their only light.
Ow.
On a jagged rock, the Mancuculum stood silhouetted against the lightning, her withered form radiating malice. Her eyes burned with cold fire as she watched them approach, a cruel smile twisting her lips. From the depths, the Aswang pack emerged, rising like demons from a churning abyss. They writhed and twisted, half fish, half beast, their eyes gleaming with bloodlust as they surged forward, their claws extended ready to tear. Lyra met them head-on, a whirlwind of emerald scales and flashing fins. She moved with the grace of a dancer, each flick of her tail sending spray flying, each twist of her body disrupting their assault. Her loyalty to the fisherman unwavering, she fought with the ferocity of a cornered tigress. Mang Pedro hurled his harpoon, striking a beast that lunged for the banca. The harpoon sank deep, pinning the creature and its blood blackening the water around them. Another Aswang screeched, diving towards Tate Ramon, who raised the Tikbalong's talisman. The air shimmered, the swarm of insects sent by the Mancuculum parting, as if blown by an unseen wind. Aga! Mga! Ahas! Tate Ramon shouted, his voice hoarse but powerful. He flung handfuls of blessed salt, each grain sizzling as it hit the water, driving away the insects and weakening the creatures of the deep. From the shadows of the rock, the Mancuculum's laughter echoed, sharp and cruel like shards of glass. So the little traitor has come to die along with her foster parents. Fools, none of you will escape my wrath. Her eyes narrowed, fixing on Lyra. You were mine once, Anak. I gave you to the humans to raise. But now I shall claim you back, whether you like it or not, Lyra faltered, the sorceress's words echoing in her mind. She looked at Mang Pedro and Tate Ramon, their faces grim but determined. With a surge of resolve, she channeled her powers, her glowing eyes blazing with defiance. But the Mancuculum pressed on, her voice dripping with malice. Join me, Lyra. Embrace your true self, and together we shall rule over all. The sky cracked with thunder, mimicking the turmoil in Lyra's heart. With a cry that tore through the night, she dove into the maelstrom, confronting the full force of the storm. The water churned, threatening to capsize the banca. Waves crashed over the fishermen, momentarily blinding them. Yet they clung on, their faces etched with determination. As the Mancuculum prepared to deliver the final blow, Tate Ramon flung the Tikbalong's talisman high. It blazed with celestial light, parting the water just enough for the banca to stay afloat. Lyra emerged from the water, shaking the seawater from her scales. Her eyes, now glowing with celestial light, locked onto her nene. For a moment, the sorceress faltered, surprise flickering across her features. In that instant, Lyra surged forward, grappling with her nene in the churning sea. Their forms blurred, a tangle of scales and shadow. The Mancuculum shrieked, her magic lashing out, but Tate Ramon's final chant weakened her hold. With a Herculean effort, Lyra managed to pin her down, the weight of their combined forms pressing them down. Nani, it ends here, Lyra gasped, her voice echoing with sadness and resolve. Won't let you hurt Mang Pedro and Tate Ramon anymore. I won't let you destroy another life the way you destroyed mine. Through the chaos, Mang Pedro and Tate Ramon had managed to right the capsized banca. They watched, hearts pounding, as Lyra struggled with the Mancuculum. With a final surge of strength, Lyra forced the sorceress to the surface, her own power surging through her veins. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, the talisman flared, binding the Mancuculum's magic and stripping away her form. The sorceress screamed, her essence dissolving into the rising sun, her curse broken, her vengeance spent. The Aswang pack, sensing their queen's demise, retreated into the depths, their screeches and splashes fading into the darkness. As the sky began to lighten, the sea grew calm, the waves subsiding into a gentle rocking. The banca, battered but afloat, drifted toward San Isidro's shore, its occupants bruised and weary, yet alive. As they pulled themselves onto the beach, the fishermen knew the battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Gubit's shadows still lurked, their hunger for vengeance and power far from satiated. For now, San Isidro was safe. But the whispers of the sea carried tales of restless spirits and ancient evils stirring in the depths. Waiting for their chance to rise again, the dawn broke over San Isidro. The sea was as calm and placid as if the furious battle of the night before had never happened. Its waves lapped gently at the shore, whispering secrets only the sand and the shells could hear. Inside Mang Pedro's hut, the air no longer crackled with the Mancuculum's malice. In its place, a comfortable, quiet hummed, punctuated by the chirping of birds and the distant call of a rooster. Lyra sat by the window, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sky met the sea. Her hair, a cascade of midnight even in the morning light, framed a face still bearing traces of the otherness that had once threatened to consume her. Her skin was cool to the touch, her eyes no longer glowed an eerie red, but they were beautiful, captivating, like pools of melted silver under the sun's first light. On the mat beside her, Mang Pedro's Tate stirred, blinking sleep from his rheumy eyes. The fever that had racked his body was gone, the Yango's grip lifted by the Tikbalang's potent potion. Outside, the village of San Isidro stirred too. The Carindaria had opened early, its aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sweet pandezel mingling with the sea air. The Sorbatero's bell rang out, a cheerful counterpoint to the earlier cacophony of drums and chants. Life was returning to its familiar rhythm, yet the memory of the battle hung in the air, unspoken but ever present. Tate Ramon, his face etched with fatigue but satisfaction, had declared Lyra no threat. His years as an albulario had honed his wisdom, his insight accepted even by those who had clung to their fears. The barrio, still smelling of wood smoke and fear, slowly began to drift away from their homes, venturing out to tend their fields or haul in their fishing nets. The whispers started then, tales of the battle that had raged through the night. Spun by those who had glimpsed the strange and terrible events from afar, the Tinderong, perched high in his watchtower, claimed he'd seen the very sea glow with angry spirits, while others spoke of a giant bird with eyes like molten gold. But most agreed on one thing: the Aswang was no more. Tate Ramon, his weathered face grave, had warned Mang Pedro of lingering dangers. Other creatures of the night might seek vengeance for the fallen Mancuculum. But for now, the sun climbed higher, bathing San Isidro in golden light, chasing away the shadows and the fear. Later that day, as the heat of noon began to fade, Mang Pedro and Lyra walked hand in hand towards the Niugin. The familiar path seemed new, each step taking them deeper into the secrets of the provincia. The coconut trees swayed gently, their fronds whispering approval, it seemed. Or perhaps that was just the wind. Reaching the clearing where the Tikbalang had vanished, Mang Pedro hesitated. The gubat was still there, looming and silent, its mysteries as impenetrable as before. Yet somehow it felt different now that the battle was done. They spent the rest of the day at the Niogan, sharing stories and dreams beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient trees. The Sorbatero, passing by, had stopped to offer them halo, his bright eyes twinkling with mirth. He'd regaled them with tales of bravery, claiming he'd seen the very Mancuculum rise from her grave to join the fray. Though Mang Pedro suspected it was more trepidation than triumph in the old man's eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they made their way back to the shore, the rhythmic crash of the waves, a soothing lullaby. Mang Pedro returned to his banca, his heart lighter, his resolve firmer. The nets he cast that evening were heavier than usual. The catch of the day, a bounty of fish, and a renewed sense of purpose. By his side, Lyra moved with the grace of one who had found her place. The fear in the villagers' eyes had faded, replaced by cautious acceptance. Some still clutched garlic and holy water, but now they also smiled and waved. That night, lying beside Lyra in the hut, the sounds of the sea, a constant murmur. Mang Pedro felt a contentment he'd never known. The provincia was alive with spirits, some benevolent, some malevolent. The gubat, the Tikbalang, the Aswang. They were all part of this world, a world he'd come to love, a world he'd defend. And at the center of that love and defense was Lyra, her hand warm and real in his, a silent promise of forever. Days turned into weeks, the memory of the battle fading into the rhythms of island life. Lyra, once feared as the Mancuculum's daughter, was now a familiar sight in San Isidro. She helped the women sort the fish, her touch gentle and sure. She taught the children how to read the tides, her laughter echoing across the shore. And when the elders gathered at dusk to swap stories, she sat among them, her eyes shining with the light of 1,000 stars. But sometimes when the wind shifted, Mang Pedro would catch a whiff of decay, a reminder of the darkness that still lingered. The Nene, the Mancuculum, was gone, but her absence echoed like a half-remembered dream. One evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, Lyra turned to Mang Pedro, her eyes downcast. She spoke of her Nene, not with hatred or fear, but with a deep, aching sorrow. In her voice, Mang Pedro heard the echo of a lost daughter, a lonely child yearning for a mother's embrace. And in that moment, his heart, hardened by years of battling darkness, softened. Understood then that their victories, like the ones they'd shared, were not just about vanquishing evil, but about conquering the loneliness that had driven a good woman to the edge of damnation. For what is a hero without a story? And what is a story without its hero?
The years flowed by in San Isidro like the tides ebbing and flowing in their endless rhythm, unbroken by the chaos of that fateful storm. Mang Pedro and Lyra, now husband and wife, lived in their hut by the sea. Their love for each other a quiet beacon in the stillness of the province outside their home. Two small figures with Lyra's dark hair and Pedro's steady gaze played along the shore, building sandcastles and chasing the retreating waves. They knew nothing of the Gubats' whispers, nothing of the Aswangs that lurked in the shadows, and nothing of the horror that had struck their village only a few years before. At night, when the full moon painted the world in shades of silver, Lyra would weave tales for their children, not of Aswang horrors, but of a fisherman who had dared to save a creature that others feared. Her eyes, though no longer glowing with the eerie light of the eternal night, flickered faintly, a reminder of her origins etched into her very being. The village of San Isidro had changed. Where once there had been fear, now there was acceptance, even admiration. The carinderia buzzed with stories of their battle, the sorbeteros spinning tales of sea spirits for wide-eyed children, while serving as delectable Mang Pedro's tate, now frail but content, smiled from his mat, his younger a distant, painful memory. The Tinderong, where the old woman had lived, no longer whispered of and the albulario, Tate Ramon, visited often, his chants now blessings for their home and not the defensive wards against evil spirits that they once were. Yet, outside the safety of the Nuugan, past the rice paddies and the fruit-laden trees, the Gubat loomed, its shadows hiding secrets. Perhaps it was the Tikbalong that neighed in the darkness, or worse, the Mancuculum, watching with ancient envy. But inside their home, surrounded by the warmth of family and the flickering lamp, Mang Pedro and Lyra felt only contentment. Lyra, with her gentle touch and keen instincts, sensed the Gubats' unease, the disturbances in the forest, the sudden animal cries in the night. And she taught Pedro to listen to the sea's murmurs, for it carried the warnings of the Aswangs in its tides. The villagers, once wary of their kind, now embraced them, sharing fish from their latest catch and halo on hot afternoons. Though some still clutched garlic at dusk, their fear had turned to cautious acceptance. The Provincia's mystery still lingered in the salty air, in the earthy scent of the forest floor, but San Isidro stood resilient, its people bound together by the fisherman's courage. Lyra and Pedro worked the banca together, their nets heavy with fish, their laughter mingling with the rhythm of the waves. Their children grew, learning to read the stars and navigate the sea. Unaware, their mother once soared beneath those same stars. A creature of the night, their world was one of sand and sun, of salty winds and endless horizons. At night, by the fire, Lyra spoke of balance, how even Aswangs could choose redemption, how love could bridge the divide between human and myth. Mang Pedro, his bolo now hung on the wall, its purpose now to carve wood rather than defend against monsters, felt the weight of her words. Their peace was hard-won, their bond tested by the darkness that still lingered in the hearts of some. The sea whispered tales of other dangers, of Mancuculums brewing in distant sea, of Balbalis and Sigbin. But for now, their family stood firm, rooted in the love that had brought them together, a fisherman and an Aswang bound by a devotion that defied the shadows. As the moon rose, casting its silver light over the sleepy barrio, a faint glow returned to Lyra's face, a soft echo of the eternal night. Their story, passed through generations, became a Probanisia legend, a testament to the enduring power of love and courage. And beyond the reach of their firelight, watching silently, the darkness acknowledged the tale's truth. A fisherman and an Aswang, united against the encroaching night, proving that sometimes salvation comes in the most unlikely bonds. For in the quiet strength of their love, Mang Pedro and Lyra had found their happily ever after, proving that even in the heart of the darkness, light can prevail.